Público tras asumir la Secretaría de Seguridad Multidimensional el pasado 16 de julio. Segundo, por la naturaleza de este simposio, su diversidad y la pertinencia del trabajo de los poderes judiciales en la prevención y abordaje de la conflictividad y las amenazas emergentes como lo son la degradación ambiental y el cambio climático, a los que se enfrentan nuestras sociedades y afectan a la paz, la seguridad y los derechos fundamentales. Asimismo, por tener el privilegio de trabajar con socios claves de alcance internacional como la Comisión Mundial de Derecho Ambiental, ONU Medio Ambiente, el Instituto de Derecho Ambiental y el Instituto Judicial Mundial del Medio Ambiente, cuyos avances nos enorgullecen. Como algunos de ustedes sabrán, la OEA es el foro hemisférico de carácter político compuesto por todos los países de las Américas que por igual y de manera interdependiente fortalece la democracia, promueve y protege los derechos humanos, impulsa el desarrollo integral y fomenta la seguridad multidimensional en favor del bienestar con justicia e inclusión social de los pueblos de las Américas. Nuestros socios y ustedes, la diversidad de regiones, países y estados que representan, junto a los embajadores de justicia ambiental de la organización, hacen eco de la voz hemisférica para lograr los derechos ambientales de más gente. Los desafíos que enfrenta nuestra región requieren respuestas hemisféricas adecuadas y con una visión global que se beneficie de las lecciones y experiencias del camino ya recorrido, más también que se enfoque en la prevención, en la gente y, por supuesto, en la justicia. Cedo ahora la palabra al doctor Scott Fulton, que compartirá un mensaje de bienvenida a nombre del comité organizador. Y de mi parte, agradezco en nombre de la Secretaría General su compromiso. Es un privilegio que nos acompañen hoy. Muchas gracias.
Bienvenido, Dajahao. Good greetings, distinguished Chief Justices, jurists, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I have the privilege of welcoming you on behalf of the sponsors of today's program, which is entitled Global Symposium on the Judiciary and Environment, Adjudicating Our Future. This gathering follows the annual meeting of the Conference of Chief Justices, and we're very thankful to Chief Justice Reiber and the president of the conference and the other members of the conference for supporting this gathering through your presence here. Much appreciated. And many thanks, of course, to our host, the Organization of American States, for making this magnificent facility available for our gathering. And I would be remiss without a special shout out to Claudia DeWent, without whose hard work and vision and the hard work of her team, we would not be here today. While this coming together may be a new experience for some in the room, this is, in a sense, a continuation of a conversation among members of the world judicial community that began nearly 2 decades ago at the 2002 Global Judges Symposium on Sustainable Development and the Role of Law in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was a judge on the Environmental Appeals Board here in Washington, D.C. at the time of that gathering, and had the honor of joining Judge Clifford Wallace of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as a U.S. judicial delegate at that symposium. I was struck at that meeting by the commonality of challenges, interests, and approaches that were shared by judges from different legal systems and different cultural settings. Convergent interests, for example, in developing a working understanding of complex environmental phenomena, and sharing best practices in managing multifaceted environmental litigation, sharing thinking about common jurisdictional issues like standing to bring suit, dealing with scientific uncertainty and evidentiary challenges, fashioning and supervising remedies in environmental cases, and the like. And in the years since, if anything, the convergence has intensified through a number of developments that have made the world a much smaller place, including the normalization of governance systems as a result of global commerce, the internet revolution and the further advances in digital processing and communication, the softening of the lines between common law systems and civil law systems, and increased understanding of ecosystem function and services and values, and awareness that ecosystems rarely align neatly with political boundaries and are most often shared across political jurisdictions. These elements of convergence and the sense of opportunity attached to them led the world judicial community to the creation in 2016 of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, an organization of judges, for judges, committed to supporting the role of the courts in responding to pressing environmental cases. And we're very fortunate to have with us today many of the champions of that initiative, including members of the governing committee, a number of whom are chief justices in their own right. These judges' presence and the presence of our other international judicial guests projects the strong belief in the importance of judges in securing a sustainable future, and in the idea that judges can indeed benefit from the cross-jurisdictional exchange of ideas and approaches. Indeed, I believe that many, if not all, of our international guests have experienced these benefits in their own jurisprudence. The idea behind the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment is really the same idea that has animated the Environmental Law Institute's work over the past 3 decades with judges around the world. We have invested in judges because, simply put, judges have an enormously influential role in delivering on the promises of environmental law. In almost every culture, the judiciary is among the most revered of institutions, such that what judges treat as important through their judgments, a society comes to regard as important. And here in the United States, we have a case in point. The courts have played an enormously pivotal role in the environmental progress we've made to date. The enactment of strong environmental laws by legislatures, of course, is very important, but the effectuation of those laws through reviewing and enforcing courts, who through their judgments have projected seriousness of purpose and follow-through, has breathed life into those laws, to the point that it's not an overstatement at all to say that the environmental quality that we enjoy in this country today, the environmental ethic that has emerged in our society, the culture that has taken hold in much of the business community that's committed to compliance and beyond compliance behaviors, the emergence of environmental rule of law, all of these things have emanated from judicial attention and judicial action. The work in this arena is, of course, not finished. We are confronting global phenomena with far-reaching implications, along with difficult and emerging national and subnational issues. The fact of the matter is that the human interface with the environment will always be a challenging space, in that when it comes to natural resource needs and the ecological balance of this world, we are inescapably an extremely demanding and rarely benign presence. And new science and new technology is shaping our understanding of the future of this human-nature interface. The opportunity presented by this conference, this kind of a gathering, is really simply to share experiences, ideas, perspectives, challenges, approaches, based on the belief that each participant will benefit and be enriched through the exchange, but also perhaps to think together about whether and how to deepen this sharing in the months and the years ahead, so that the role of the judiciary broadly and the contribution of each judge through his or her casework will be everything that society needs it to be. So we thank you for your presence here. We thank you in advance for your participation. We are now going to take a short break, less than 5 minutes. This is a please stay in the room, but feel free to chat sort of break, to transition to the opening and keynote addresses. Again, welcome and thank you.
Como bien dijo el doctor Fulton, tendremos una pequeña pausa de 2 minutos para hacer el cambio de la mesa principal. Muchas gracias. Let's take our seats, please. Tomemos nuestros asientos, por favor. Bien, en este segmento tenemos previstos 2 discursos de honor que marcarán la apertura de este simposio. Para ello, nos honran con su presencia en esta mañana Su Excelencia Paul Reiber, presidente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia del Estado de Vermont y presidente de la Conferencia de Presidentes de Cortes Supremas de los Estados Unidos. Además, Luis Almagro, secretario general de la Organización de Estados Americanos. El señor Paul Reiber ya he dicho sus títulos, pero previamente trabajó en el sector privado como socio en la firma Kenland, Schreiber y Facey. Es graduado por el Hampton-Sydney College y abogado por la Escuela de Derecho de Suffolk. Me toca esta mañana hacer la introducción a este segmento y presentarles a nuestro secretario general. Su biografía es muy conocida y su trayectoria también en el hemisferio. Y más que decirle cuestiones como que es un abogado, diplomático, exministro de Relaciones Exteriores, quisiera presentarle con una pequeña anécdota. Y es que la primera vez que yo escuché su nombre, lo escuché asociado a cuestiones relacionadas nada más y nada menos que al impacto ambiental y a un conflicto sobre el funcionamiento de unas fábricas de papel o pasteras como son conocidas. Y durante la gestión del secretario general, dicho conflicto culminó con el establecimiento de un comité binacional de monitoreo del impacto y del desempeño ambiental de dicha pastera. Por otro lado, quisiera decir algunas cosas que quizás ustedes no escucharán comúnmente, pero al inicio de su gestión, una de las frases que él comentó públicamente tenían que ver con que como secretario general de la OEA decía, soy gobierno y soy oposición. I am both government and opposition. I must be the voice of those without a voice. The more discriminated against. I must be the voice of those who suffer inequality, who suffer from the lack of protection of their rights, and I must be the staunchest defender of those rights. Durante su gestión, el secretario general se ha regido por el buque insignia de más derechos para más personas, incluyendo que la distribución de las cargas y los beneficios relacionados al ambiente sean distribuidos de una manera equitativa y que la gente de este hemisferio sienta que sus derechos son respetados y que tienen protección ante estas nuevas amenazas que enfrentamos hoy en día, como el daño ambiental y el cambio climático. Finalmente, el secretario ha dicho, juntos podemos darle a la OEA una credibilidad que hoy todos reclaman. La OEA del siglo XXI debe ser global, salir al mundo, relacionarse con países y entornos estratégicos, con organismos multilaterales, globales y regionales. Y qué mejor ejemplo que tenerlos a todos ustedes en esta sala hoy, de distintas regiones, de distintos países del hemisferio, intercambiando sobre los derechos ambientales y las decisiones que están marcando y continuarán marcando nuestro futuro. Señor secretario general, con esa breve introducción y que espero haya hecho honra un poco a su trayectoria, tiene usted la palabra.
Eso no fue una breve introducción, eso es más largo que mi discurso. Frente a amenazas como la degradación y el daño ambiental y el cambio climático, el objetivo de la OEA está claro: apoyar a los Estados miembros en sus esfuerzos para prevenir y combatir los efectos sociales de estas amenazas, fortaleciendo así la justicia socioambiental y promoviendo la paz y la estabilidad regional. Resulta simple expresar nuestras aspiraciones y lo que buscamos. Sin embargo, lograrlo requiere el apoyo clave a quienes agradecemos: la Comisión Mundial de Derecho Ambiental de UISN, ONU Medio Ambiente, el Instituto de Derecho Ambiental, el nuevo Instituto Judicial Mundial de Medio Ambiente, además de la cooperación de otros actores en los países. Es decir, que con nuestras acciones sumemos. Hoy tenemos la oportunidad de contar con jueces, científicos, expertos y académicos de lugares tan lejanos como Ruanda, China, Noruega, quienes junto a sus pares en nuestros Estados miembros intercambiarán experiencias sobre las respuestas y medidas judiciales efectivas que pueden hacer una diferencia en el hábitat y en la vida de las personas. Puede que la distancia nos separe, pero la realidad es que los problemas ambientales son problemas comunes, nos unen, al igual que es el poder que tienen los jueces como agentes de cambio. Los jueces son los grandes aliados en la reducción de la conflictividad social y en la lucha por un ambiente sano. Los jueces tienen la capacidad y la responsabilidad de crear y promover una ciudadanía ecológica, al hacer valer las leyes que sustentan el paradigma que se requiere para alcanzar el desarrollo sostenible basado en la justicia, en la equidad y en la búsqueda de la paz como fin último. Cabe destacar que por la naturaleza diversa y compleja de las amenazas que enfrenta nuestra sociedad en la actualidad, el impacto de su trabajo trasciende lo local y repercute en el plano internacional, afectando incluso derechos colectivos y difusos. El aumento de la contaminación y las preocupaciones en los estados insulares del Caribe ante el incremento de los desastres naturales por el cambio climático requieren de respuestas hemisféricas, adecuadas e integrales, con una visión de prevención, centradas en el ser humano y en la justicia y basadas en el conocimiento. Los científicos, académicos y expertos que nos acompañan tienen un gran papel, incluso en romper las barreras y los tecnicismos para apoyar la toma de decisiones. En las Américas, las respuestas de esta índole han sido y continúan siendo pioneras, tanto en el desarrollo como en la aplicación de principios, leyes y convenios ambientales para la tutela de lugares tan preciados para la humanidad como es la región amazónica, el pulmón del mundo. El trabajo de nuestros embajadores de justicia ambiental y del Sistema Interamericano de Derechos Humanos en la reciente opinión consultiva 23 de la Corte Interamericana es testimonio de ello. En este simposio tenemos la gran oportunidad de intercambiar experiencias sobre estas innovadoras respuestas y también de aprender a identificar sinergias con los avances e iniciativas de construcción colectiva. Cabe mencionar algunas. Quiero destacar, en primer lugar, la Declaración Mundial sobre el Estado de Derecho Ambiental reconocida por las Naciones Unidas como un aporte al desarrollo del derecho internacional. La iniciativa del Pacto Global para el Medio Ambiente y la reciente Declaración de Brasilia sobre justicia hídrica. Los desafíos y las amenazas son múltiples: la minería y la tala ilegal, la seguridad hídrica, la contaminación en todas sus variables, el daño ambiental y el tráfico ilegal de especies, entre otros. Todos afectan la seguridad, la democracia y el goce de derechos fundamentales, entre ellos el derecho al acceso a la información, a la toma de decisiones y a la justicia en cuestiones ambientales. Los Estados miembros de la OEA tienen un gran compromiso con respecto a estos derechos y la legítima labor que realizan todas aquellas personas, grupos y organizaciones que promueven y defienden los derechos humanos en asuntos ambientales. Es nuestro deber trabajar conjuntamente para garantizarles un entorno seguro y propicio, en el que puedan actuar sin amenazas, restricciones, ataques e inseguridad. Este es un tema en el que nuestro hemisferio requiere y debe avanzar para ser ejemplo junto a otras regiones. En este sentido, felicito y nos sumamos a la nueva iniciativa que ONU Medio Ambiente lanzará en Río de Janeiro en unos pocos días sobre la defensa de estos derechos ambientales. Los llamados recientes de nuestra Asamblea General y la próxima apertura para firma y ratificación en la ONU del Acuerdo de Escazú sobre el principio 10 de Río hacen de este tema un punto de gran relevancia para los debates de estos 2 días hacia la identificación de puntos de convergencia como el papel de la ciencia en las decisiones judiciales. Este es un claro ejemplo de cómo podemos convertir los desafíos en oportunidades, apoyándonos en la solidaridad, la equidad y en nuestro aprendizaje colectivo. Los científicos, académicos y expertos que nos acompañan, en línea con el pensamiento de Roger Carson en su Primavera Silenciosa, nos ayudan a entender los cambios y a abrir los ojos ante las maravillas que tenemos, con preguntas como ¿qué pasaría si nunca lo hubiésemos visto? O si supiéramos que no lo volveríamos a ver. A ustedes, los jueces, les toca comprender y analizar preguntas de esta índole para efectivamente cerrar la brecha entre las leyes y su implementación y continuar siendo pilar fundamental del sistema democrático, de la seguridad y de la paz social. Gracias. Gracias, Claudia.
Ahora tenemos las palabras del señor Paul Reiber, juez presidente de la Corte Suprema de Justicia del Estado de Vermont y presidente de la Conferencia de Presidentes de Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos. Señor Reiber.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning. It's so nice to be here. I bring you greetings from the Conference of Chief Justices. This is a conference of all of the Chief Justices of all the United States and U.S. possessions. We just finished a wonderful conference in Rhode Island. Joining me here this morning is the immediate past president of CCJ, as we call it, Chief Justice O'Connor, who is seated over there to my left. The chief is Chief Justice of Ohio. As I say, I bring you warm greetings from our conference. It's such a pleasure to be here with voices from so many different countries and areas of the world about this important topic. We have a story in my home state of Vermont. We're a very small state, probably a population that is less than minor cities in some of your countries. We have a population of about 650,000 people. It's a very mountainous state. Some of you know this. As a matter of fact, I rode in the van on the way over here this morning with a judge from China who was just in Vermont visiting our environmental court. We have a very mountainous region in the state, a lot of rock, a lot of bedrock that has created a very fragile environmental problem for the water table in many respects. So some of my story, and I want to tell you the story of Vermont and Vermont's very brief history with respect to its development of environmental law and the process and procedure that we have implemented to address it here this morning. But this is a story more than only in my state. It really is a story that resonates throughout this entire country. The New York Times, in an article this spring, noted that 50 years ago, here in this country, an oil rig exploded off the coast of California. The following year, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, where my friend Chief O'Connor is from, which is in the central part of the United States, actually caught fire. Residents in a neighborhood in New York State discovered toxic waste that was leaching into the basements of their houses that had been dumped into a nearby canal decades before. Across the country, some lakes were too polluted for fishing or swimming, and for years before, including in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I was born, there were cities so choked with smog that residents would say if you wore a white shirt to work in the morning, it would be gray as the air by lunchtime. My grandfather, I remember, had photographs of downtown Pittsburgh in the 30s, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, you could not see from one side of the street to the other in the middle of the day. These were some of the environmental problems we faced in this country 50 years ago, and it prompted action. On April 22, 1970, millions of people throughout the country demonstrated, and that year, in a bipartisan effort in Congress, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency was created, and key legislation, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, all were passed and came into force. Meanwhile, back home in Vermont, at about the same time, following the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, the interstate road system came to my state of Vermont. By the late 1960s, we saw a sudden and dramatic change to Vermont's quiet countryside. The opening of the interstate highway system brought Vermont at least an hour closer in driving time for residents of Boston and New York City, and southern Vermont towns became very popular vacation destinations and places for second homes. Our population and developed areas had hardly grown since the beginning of the 20th century, but almost all at once, new permanent structures began to grow everywhere. Buildings were built on steep slopes and hillsides, places with inadequate access by road, inadequate septic, and inadequate setback from drilled wells for potable water. As our then Governor Dean Davis later said after he viewed one of these areas, he said, "We found open sewers running into the ditches on the hillsides, and people were up in arms." So in June of 1969, nearly 50 years ago now, Governor Davis established a commission on environmental control to study the problem and report back to the legislature. The commission wound up recommending a new state system for reviewing and controlling plans for large-scale development. There were those who were opposed to any environmental control at all in my state, including soon-to-be elected Governor Tom Salmon, a Democrat from that same southern part of the state that the Governor Davis had viewed. He, with others, were opposed to state control of any development, believing this to be an unacceptable intrusion of private property rights. But a bill was passed known as Act 250, signed by the governor April 9, 1970. The stated purpose of the act was this: to protect and conserve the lands and the environment of the state, and to ensure that these lands and environment are devoted to uses which are not detrimental to the public welfare and interests, end quote. The law created a system for review and control of plans for large-scale and environmentally sensitive development. Governor Davis insisted, and I think this is important, that the system not be centered in Montpelier, the state capital, so the power to commence the review of projects was vested locally in groups of regional commissions. 9 regional district environmental commissions, they're called, were created, whose members were and still are lay people, not government officials. Their decision-making process, supported by a modest staff, centers on 10 criteria for reviewing development and subdivision plans that address significant environmental, aesthetic, or community impact. And this has been the focus of the Act 250 process to this day, Act 250 was designed to achieve a balance between economic development and the legitimate interests of citizens, municipalities, and state agencies interested in the protection of the environment. The idea of the act was to ensure good planning, not to stop development. In fact, today, about 98% of applications for development under Act 250 are approved, but with conditions. Act 250 is not a zoning law. Instead, it provides for statewide planning review, commenced on a local level, for large developments and subdivisions. So to this point, I've described the story of some of the environmental challenges in our country here and in my state, the threats to communities, and how citizens came together to demand and the legislature respond with laws to protect against those threats. But of course, the creation of landmark legislation, as in my state, is only the beginning of the story, because the law must then be enforced and applied in the decisions that we make as judges, developed through our court systems. I don't need to tell you the important role of courts in developing and upholding the law. The judiciary is different and distinct from the other parts of government. The legislature and the executive reflect the will of the people. For them, proper response to current events and the will of the electorate is part of their job. When rivers catch fire, when sewage is running down the hillside, citizens expect government to respond through laws like the Clean Water Act and Act 250. But the work of courts is different, of course. While the other parts of government must choose how to respond to political pressure, it is our job to fairly and impartially apply the law in all situations, among all people and all interests involved. In doing so, we equalize the power between majorities and minorities, between popular and unpopular thought, between the powerful and the weak, the rights of individuals and the voice of dissent. This is at the root of the Constitution and vital to a healthy democracy. Our great first president, George Washington, in a letter to Edmund Randolph in 1789, called the due administration of justice the firmest pillar of good government, and our system of justice as essential to the happiness of our country and to the stability of its political system. The democratic principles courts uphold are those to which all of us here are committed, I know today. The work of each of you in your courts, your presence here today, as well as that of the distinguished Secretary General of the Organization of American States, his leadership, and the work of the OAS itself are all testimony to a commitment to the rule of law, human rights, and to equal treatment under the law. So what does this have to do specifically with environmental problems? What is the role of courts who seek to apply environmental law? Environmental cases can be very complex. As the type and nature of conflict evolves, as with any structure of government, the courts must evolve too. An example, consider this. I read about this recently and I thought it might be apropos for this address. In Paris Central, at the Place des Trois, the Arc de Triomphe, there is a roundabout with 12 streets that radiate into the center. This is a roundabout that was created in the middle part of the 18th century as a part of a massive urban renewal program of boulevards, parks, and public spaces in Paris. But Baron Haussmann, the prefect in Paris, who was charged with the redesign of these open spaces, certainly did not envision the age of automobiles. In fact, the roundabout now is so notorious that when you rent a car at the CDG, the airport, Charles de Gaulle, I understand you're required to check a box if you're going to drive at the Place, because you have to pay extra if that's your intent. So, judging a case, an environmental case, I would suggest to you, can sometimes seem like driving at the plus. Resolving complex questions of jurisdiction, party status, timeliness of claims, evidentiary issues, and sophisticated questions of science can sometimes feel like cars coming at you from every direction as though sitting in the middle lane of the roundabout at the Place. But this is the medium in which we work. As the National Center for State Courts, Tom Clark, wrote in his book, wonderful book on courts for the 21st century, he said, nothing is immutable about the issues framed in the cases that are filed. Cases evolve with the underlying problems and situations of litigants. In my state initially, when the legislature passed Act 250 in 1970, it set up an administrative review board called the Environmental Board to hear appeals from the 9 district environmental commissions I mentioned earlier. Violations of environmental law, on the other hand, laws that govern water pollution, air pollution, and the like, were at that time heard in our general jurisdiction courts. 20 years later, the legislature thought it would be wise to increase the oversight of appellate decisions of these boards, and so it created a statewide specialized environmental court to address the challenge of some of these cases. And we have in the room here with us this morning Judge Meredith Wright. Meredith, would you stand up so folks can see you? Judge Wright was our very first environmental judge appointed in that decade of the early 90s. The court that Meredith sat on was initially a very limited jurisdiction, hearing only violations of state environmental law. Later, its jurisdiction was expanded to hear appeals of local zoning and subdivision matters, and most notably in 2005, a second judge was added and its jurisdiction expanded again, this time to hear all appeals of Act 250 decisions. So you see, we changed the process from that of administrative review by non-lawyer judges to one involving professional jurists, specially dedicated to environmental legal disputes. This transition from an administrative environmental board to a professional court addressed an obvious concern. The decisions out of the board were in some cases inconsistent, even ad hoc. The board originally created by Act 250 was 9 people, all lay people. Initially, it included a professor, an engineer, a homemaker, a real estate agent, and a sheriff. And it was created as a government agency, part of the executive branch. But later, by creating the Environmental Court as part of our Vermont Judiciary, and then ultimately expanding its jurisdiction to include Act 250 appeals, Vermont standardized and consolidated the appeals process for Act 250 and other environmental appeals. The Vermont E-Court, as we call it, the Environmental Court, E for short, is one of the first unified courts in our state. This is a radical departure for us because we are most importantly, a general jurisdiction, a state that sits in general jurisdiction courts. We're too small to be specialized in criminal dockets, civil dockets, family dockets. So it's very significant that the legislature saw fit to create a specialized docket for environmental appeals specifically. So we have, in effect, a judicial center now of excellence where judges and court staff have particularized training and experience, in the words of Mike Benger in a recent Kentucky Law Review piece that he wrote. Each of you sits in matters that arise within structures created by the law-making institutions in your countries. Each of you makes important contributions in complex matters to the health and welfare of the people you serve through the work that you do in the interests of the rule of law, and I commend you, and I thank you. Courts and the rule of law serve a master, and the master is called public trust. The opposite of trust is untrusted. A government that is untrusted isn't a good thing. Untrustworthiness, as Catherine Hawley, a professor at St. Andrews University, has written, is a recipe for betrayal, disappointment, and exploitation. If government institutions want to be trusted, she writes, they must develop and demonstrate the willingness and ability to live up to their commitments to fairness and opportunity for all. We in our respective jurisdictions cannot be oblivious to environmental issues and the complexities that they present. The people we serve have entrusted us with the responsibility to properly address the challenge these cases present. Environmental disputes present difficult problems for courts. They are complex, involving questions of science that impact the health and welfare of people and all manner of human rights. This was the incentive for our specialized environmental court. If we as judges are to fulfill our profound responsibilities, we must develop processes of judicial administration that ensure a robust, independent judiciary, one that evolves to meet the needs of our people and that resolves disputes with certainty and impartiality. All of you here, I know, are working toward this goal. We are here today to share knowledge about these concerns, all toward better solutions for the well-being of our global environment and those we serve. Thank you for your commitment to these purposes. I depend on it. We all do. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a pasar ahora a un receso café de unos 15 minutos. Quisiera pedirles que se queden en sus asientos, aquellos que están en la mesa, que el secretario general pasará a saludarles. Muchas gracias.